Okay, so we're going to begin with our honoring statement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. So I'm kind of thinking, let's skip the icebreakers, because I don't know if you guys really care about this. You can talk about it on your own time.
Night.
Night. I'm mourning for both. Okay, so some announcements. Our annual free health conference is coming up on March 11th. Keep an eye out on the newsletter for ticket info and just general information. It's a really good way to network with other students. There are high schoolers also attending, so if you want to like help them, there's that too. There's also healthcare professionals from like different fields. But yeah, we'll be sending out more information on our newsletter. And if you're not on our newsletter, stick around after and we'll try to get you on that. Do you want me to come to that? Sure. We'll email you.
Yeah, some info. Like that.
And then oh yeah, then spring quarter, like the first weekend, we're planning on having a fun anatomy learning event. With cadavers. Like real cadavers. So sounds super cool. Our predecessor, the previous president of MAPS, she's the one who kind of like organized this. So we have more information will come out soon, but mark your calendars for either April 1st or 2nd. It will be first come first, or not first come first serve. It will be invite only. So once again, make sure you're on that newsletter so you do get this information. Yeah. Okay. That's now we can switch.
Cool. Yeah.
All right. I don't know.
Great. Thank you. So, and thank you for doing the acknowledgement. Yes. Then I will do one another. So hi everyone. Welcome. My name is Sarah Haffner. I use she, her pronouns. And my role, I am with the admissions office here at the University of Washington School of Medicine. And just to be clear, I am not on the admissions committee. So I'm not someone who makes decisions, which is how I like it, because that means I can just be open and talk to y'all without having that added pressure. So I'm someone you can just talk to and ask questions about. I've been with the office for more than 10 years. So I've seen a lot, I know a lot, but if I don't have the answer to your question, I know the people to ask. So feel free to ask me what you need to. And I'm not taking any notes. Like you can ask me questions and it won't matter. If that makes sense. Okay. So just to get sort of a general sense to help me sort of guide my presentation, I want to know how many years you're all out of like applying. So is anyone planning to apply this summer? Okay, a couple folks. Cool. How about next summer? Okay, a few more, and then other people maybe like further down the line than that. Okay, cool, that helps me. Also, how many folks here are residents of Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, or Idaho? Cool, and anyone from outside of that region? Okay, cool, all right, so that helps me. And so the main goal of this presentation is to give you a sense of our admissions process, what the parts of the application are, and what we are looking for at the School of Medicine. I want you to be able to put your best foot forward. So one of the most important things to think about, oh, and I just skipped 2 slides, when looking at schools that you want to apply to is the mission statement. So I recommend you look at the mission statement for every school you're considering. Because if you look at them, and they're always on the website. And so it's something you can find on every website. It's usually like a page or less. And if it doesn't jive with you, you can say, okay, doesn't jive with me. So that school and I probably wouldn't fit. Okay, so that's a good way to get to start looking at any medical school, which is why I start with it. So our school is committed to our WWAMI region. That's Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. We're at WWAMI. And we have a long mission statement, but this is sort of broken down into bullet points. We recognize that we need the mission of UW Medicine is to serve the healthcare needs of our region. And so that's our primary concern. And we recognize that primary care doctors are a big part of that, but we also need every kind of doctor. So it doesn't matter what kind of field you're interested in, we need everybody. Obviously, biomedical research is important to us. And if you're super interested in that, you might want to consider the MSTP program, Medical Scientist Training Program. That's the MD PhD track. I am not the person who you can talk to about that, but I have a little bit of info, but it's a separate admissions process. And then we also emphasize opportunities for educationally and economically disadvantaged folks. So one thing to know is over 20% of the population in our region is rural, which is one of the reasons that we really emphasize that primary care component. So I'm going to put down, you know what, I'll just put down all the things because I'm not standing in front of it. No need for fancy animations. So in order that meet our mission, that's like the first thing. So are you going to serve the healthcare needs of our region and or disadvantaged or underserved communities, right? So if you have extensive experience with an underserved community and you're not, and then that also meets our mission, if that makes sense, even if it's not within our region. So these are general things that we expect from our applicants. We need you to understand what it means to be a physician. We need to know that you really get it, that you know what you're signing up for. So that's where, and for that information, we're looking at, have you really explored what that means? And that's similar with this. And I think, no, that's a different slide deck. So for this one, a good way to do this is, obviously read the news, follow the news, but also it can be really good to follow, if you're on social media, follow healthcare, follow medical students, follow physicians to sort of see what the flavor is, what's happening. Academic ability means you need to be able to handle the rigors of our course load. It does not mean anything specific. It doesn't mean a certain MCAT score. It doesn't mean a certain GPA. It just means by the time you're entering medical school, we need to know that you're going to be able to handle the rigors of the course load so that you don't come to the school, pay a bunch of money, and then aren't able to finish. And then analytical thinking is important because it's an important part of being a doctor. So we like to see evidence of that. And communication and interpersonal skills, which we get both from your application, the letters of recommendation, and your interview. So for non-WWAMI applicants, new this year, so this will be the second year doing it, we actually have opened up our requirements for non-WWAMI applicants. So for those folks who raised your hand because you were from WWAMI, I'm very pleased to tell you that you have your percentage of chance just went way up because you already have a tighter region because you're here. So that's a great sign. And then we also, again, as I mentioned earlier, that the whole serving this community, also serving underserved communities also count for that. Let's see. Oh, wow, I had good notes there that I didn't say because I said it a lot more globally. So this I'm pointing out, I want to talk a little bit about the holistic review. This gives you, I think, is sort of a snapshot of what it means to have holistic reviews in medicine. So it means that, and this is from the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges. So this is sort of like the standard of what holistic review means. We've been using holistic review for, I don't even know how many years, a long time. And part of what it means is that taking everybody into context, their life experiences, right? So, the metrics is only one piece. There are all we know that, for example, all these things can influence the metrics, right? So growing up in a rural community can influence your preparation for college, which can influence your, how you do in college. All that stuff is taken into account, right? And all these life experiences, distance, all that stuff also leads into all these other things, right? So one thing I want you all to notice is this thing, world events, right here. And I think I even have a little, animation, world events. Can you guys see that? World events. And the reason I want to point out is that we were already in a good position. I guess that was, the next slide wasn't good for that. We were already in a good position to take into account the events of the last couple of years when it rolled up. So I get a lot of questions like, well, getting ready for medical school is a lot harder now because of COVID, right? Like it's changed everything. And I want you all to know that we are aware of that. And we're looking, it's not so much, so it's taken into account when we're looking at it. And that also accounts for like, you know, like all the social stuff that our country has gone through the last few years. We're thinking about that when we read applications. We're recognizing the kind of influences that can affect people. So we have actually overhauled our clinical experiences page on our website. The way we look at your clinical experiences has changed a lot. The big thing to know, and this might be the takeaway I want you to have, is that less important than what you do is what you learned. Okay, so people ask me, is this good enough? Will this count? And I'm like, it doesn't matter what the thing is. What did you learn from the experience, and how can you tell the committee what you learned? Right, so it's not that we're not requiring any minimum numbers of shadowing or any of that stuff. What we want to know is, in your clinical experiences, have you learned what it's like to be a physician? Have you learned what have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about medicine? Those are the kinds of things we're looking for in your application and your interview. And that's much more important than the name of the particular thing you did. So just to quickly talk about the course requirements, this is also on our website. I don't want to spend a lot of time because I want to make sure we get to the really meaty stuff. The competency means it's not necessarily, you get to fill in how you met that requirement. There's more information on the site. Year of bio, a year of chem. We want to make sure that the competencies, though, are the important thing, because I don't need to read all of this stuff. The main thing to know about course requirements, this is not a checklist. These are the things you need to know to be able to do medical school, right? So you need to have these skills. You need to know these subjects so that when you enter medical school, you can learn them to be a physician, right? Because the whole goal of this, right, is to be a physician and to help patients. So you're learning these things not to check off a list, and we're not looking at it as checking out. We're looking at it like, are they going to be able to handle the course? So that's how we want you to look at this when you're thinking about it. And so people call me like, do I need to take this course because I didn't take this course, or it's been a few years, does it still count? And I say, what matters is, do you feel like you have a handle on that material so that when you enter medical school, you're ready for it, right? And so biochemistry particularly, you know, some like we can't say you take this class and this class and this class, because we take applicants from all over the country, and every college labels things differently. So we put it in terms of you, not the admissions committee. You have to decide, do I know enough about biochemistry? Do I have a good handle on biochemistry? And so what I recommend, and I'll talk a little bit more about the MCAT in a minute, but you take the MCAT, it's not due until September 30th of the year you apply, but I recommend you take it more in the spring. We'll get to that in a minute. The MCAS application opens usually end of May, beginning of June. It's been going earlier and earlier, so probably end of May, but it's not due until October. Yeah, so think about that when you're thinking about applying, about how these things open up a lot sooner. So the MCAT scores are generally good for 3 years. With the effects of the pandemic, we have lengthened that sometimes to 4 years. So I would check our website when you're ready to apply and see what the current rules are. But generally, it's 3 years. I recommend that. So you're required to do it by September, but it's probably a good bet to take it the spring of the year you apply. So like by May or so, because then you'll get your score back in plenty of time. If you look at that score and think that doesn't really reflect my knowledge and abilities, you have time to retake it before September. So that's one reason to think about that. A lot of times too, people say, oh, but I want to study for a certain number of weeks after I do the courses. But it actually sort of makes sense, since a lot of the material on the MCAT is in your courses if you study concurrently with your coursework, because it's going to be a lot of that material, depending on what course you're taking at that time. And that's for folks who are currently in school. Obviously, some folks wait until they're out of school to do this. And in that case, also springtime is still a good time to do it. And then I don't really want to talk a lot about GPA and MCAT because it's really not super important. And one of the best ways to demonstrate that is to show you that for folks, there are folks who applied who had 110 people applied who had very high MCAT and GPA combo. You see that 110 people applied. We accepted 40 of those. That means 70 of those people, we were like, no, they don't have it. Right? And I like to point that out because that's not enough. And it's not the only thing we're looking at. Really, we're like, oh, does this person have the academic ability to handle our coursework? Okay, cool. I'm going to set that aside and really look at the other stuff. Do they know what it means to be a physician? Are they compassionate? Things like that. So, but generally, and I should say too, that folks in like this range, the folks who are accepted generally have post-bac work that isn't reflected in this chart. But generally we see that if you have above a 50th percentile, and that changes from year to year, that MCAT is usually pretty solid. Lower than 50th percentile is where, according to data, we start getting nervous. But still people get in with that if they can demonstrate their academic ability in other ways. So the AMCAS application due the 15th. This was the 2022 processing fee. I don't know what it is this year, but it's probably around this. It hasn't changed much. And you do it all through this national organization that is it's a nonprofit national organization that's run by all the medical schools. And then I want to make sure everyone is aware of the fee assistance program. This is run again through the AAMC, and you want to apply to this before you take your MCAT, because not only does it reduce your MCAT registration fees significantly, but you also get a bunch of prep materials, which are expensive, for free. And so that's at AAMC.org, students applying free assistance program. Yeah, you also get the MSAR, and you get to apply, it's like over $1,000 value. So, and I know that because of COVID, their requirements for what it means to be disadvantaged have changed over the last few years. So I recommend you check this out because it can be really helpful to overcome the financial barriers of applying to medical school. And then, okay, so when you're filling out your AMCAS application, you have to put down your experience. There's an experiences section. And these are the kinds of things that you would put down. But again, what's more important than the thing is what you learn from it. And I like to point this out too, that like employment and hobbies are important. And one of the things that people don't realize about employment, they're like, I don't need to put down that I was a barista at Starbucks. Like that's not relevant for medical school. But I want you to think about, what did I learn in my experience as a barista at Starbucks? Now, I didn't work at Starbucks, but I was a barista for many years. And I can tell you, I learned a lot about customer service, time management. Oh, and I was doing it while I was a student, actually, here at the UW. And I learned a lot of valuable skills that I think would be super relevant for a medical career if that's what I wanted to do. Right. So I want you, but the other thing about employment, not only have you learned something from it, it can help our committee members with that holistic review, right? So they can look at your applicant. This is an example of the kind of thing they do for holistic review. They look at your application and they say, wow, this person is working almost full time during their time as an undergrad, and they're able to maintain a solid B average. That is impressive, right? So they see that what you're doing they put it together, right? That's that holistic piece. Another thing that holistic review can mean is, let's say you write in your maybe you have a dip in your grades one semester, and they see that as they're scrolling through and they're like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, they do have an upward, looks like they had a dip, but it got better. I think that I can tell that they did a good job, but what was happening? And then they read your personal statement. They say, oh, she writes in her personal statement that her aunt was dying, and she learned a lot about the medical field through that time above, but that corresponds to this dip in grades, right? So they are doing some of that work and they're trying to see who you are as a whole person through those different pieces, and they're trying to put it together, if that sort of helps understand what I mean by holistic. So these are kind of some of the questions that you should consider when writing about your experiences. I will say the new page on the website, the clinical experiences page, has a lot of really good reflection prompts on it that I would encourage you to check out. But these are the kinds of things we're looking at. Is this, how well do you know yourself? How well do you know medicine? And then, so when you fill out the personal statement, again, this is part of AMCAS application. The question is still, explain why you want to go to medical school. I would encourage you to think of it more as, why do you want to be a doctor, right? So think about it in terms of your motivation for medicine, what you've done as related to medicine so far. How have you explored? How did you get here? Tell us about your journey. Put it all together for us, right? Because you've got all those experiences listed, and I don't know about everyone, but when I look at an application, the view that I look at in our system shows me your experiences first, and then the personal statement. And that often helps me to sort of tie those different pieces together because I get a better sense of who you are as a whole person. So then comes the secondary application. In order to get a secondary application, if you are a WWAMI resident, you'll get a secondary application. If you've completed the basic requirements and you meet the, there's an academic cutoff, which I think for WWAMI applicants is like 498 and like a 3.0. It changes every year slightly. So if you meet those, you'll get a secondary. For out-of-region applicants, those cutoffs are slightly higher, not extremely higher, but slightly higher. And you have an additional, you check out, you tell us what your ties to the region are. You tell us, you have a little sort of secondary thing where you tell us a little bit about that before you get your secondary application. So the secondary application has additional statements, and I'll tell you, we always post these statements on our website. So if you have submitted your primary application and you're a WWAMI resident, go to our website, because it takes like 6 weeks or more sometimes for AMCAS to process all your stuff in order for you to get the secondary. And it takes us a while it takes a while, all the processing. But that doesn't mean you can't start. You can go to the website, you're like, oh, those are the 4 questions this year. I'm going to start jotting down my ideas. And you can then, you get the secondary, boom, you can submit it like same day. And people do that because they have all that time to practice. So we post those questions. That's also when your letters of recommendation are required. But of course, y'all should be talking to your people that you want to write you letters a lot earlier than that, right? You want to get them, you want to let them know that you're going to be asking them and give them plenty of time to write you that letter. We currently require a Casper test. We're talking about, we've been piloting it for some time. We're not 100% sure if we're going to keep requiring it or in the same way. So watch our website about that. But the deadlines do come up prior to the primary, like the deadlines for AMCAS is like October 15th, but you're going to have to, if you're at a region, do that before that deadline. So just check our websites for the deadlines and requirements. And that's true for every school you're applying to. And then the application fee, I don't think, we've gotten away with waiving it for the last few years. So I don't know if any finance people are going to tell us we have to start charging for it again, but check our website, but hopefully we'll be able to keep waiving that for you. And then obviously the deadline that should be a 3, December 1st for the secondary. So the letters of recommendation, you can either submit a committee letter or 3 letters, but we accept up to 6. And we don't have any specific requirements. So we don't require, a letter from a faculty member or anything. What we do want though, we want to help understand you as a whole person. So I'd say, 3 letters from 3 faculty members, unless you're doing vastly different things with them, like working with them as part of if they're a PI or something, those letters might look rather similar. So getting people who know you in different spheres can be really helpful. Like if someone that you work with, someone that whom you volunteer for, think about sort of the different people who can tell a fuller picture of who you are. How do you work as part of a team? Your leadership skills, your compassion, all those kinds of things are really helpful. And these are the kinds of things that we learn from a letter. And what's the nice thing about a letter, I want you to, I guess the big advice I would give you about a letter is ask the people who are going to write you the best letters. The title doesn't matter. So if you have a choice between a really famous professor who's like nationally known and a really big deal, who doesn't know you very well, and their TA who doesn't have a famous name but knows you well, ask the TA. Because we're not going to say, oh, only a TA. We're going to say, wow, this person who knows them well really speaks highly of their X, Y, and Z abilities, right? So ask the people who are going to write you the best letters. And then the next part of the application process, after your secondary is submitted, why is this in the wrong spot? So the pre-screening and academic screening comes after the AMCAS. I already talked about that. Then the secondary. Then after you submit your secondary, you're screened for interview, and I'm blocking it. Screening for interview. And then while they're screening, they're thinking about, they're looking at your academics. Are you going to be able to handle the course load? The reason this says domestic is because if all of your clinical experiences are outside of this country, then there's concern that maybe you don't have a full understanding of if you want to be a physician in this country, you should have experience here in this country. So it doesn't have to be shadowing, but clinical experience, you should try to do domestic experiences. And experiences are consistent with the goals, just means if you do have a goal, if you put it in your personal statement, for example, that, I want to be a neurologist, but you don't have any experience even touching that, we're going to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. What's the connection? Or someone might say, I want to be a rural primary care physician, right? Because they think, oh, that's what UW wants, right? But then we look at their experience and like, well, they've shadowed an orthopedist, and they work a lot with kids. Like, what's the connection? That doesn't make sense, right? But if someone is like, I want to be a pediatrician, and their experiences are like volunteering with kids and they've shadowed pediatricians, that makes a lot more sense. And that is just to say, you don't have to have a goal. You don't have to know what you want to do. But if you do, make sure that the reason for that is clear, that there's some sort of explanation of why. And you can include that in your personal statement of why you're interested in that particular field. And your motivation should be really clear. Your letters of recommendation should be fine, right? Just no red flags. And so again, like the solid letters of recommendation are usually from people who know you. And then after the screening for interview, you could be invited for interview anytime. Interviews happen between October and March. So we're still interviewing this week. So the interview is a supplement to your application. And this is just a little list of these are things we get from the application. Here's what we get from the interview. And there are lots of resources on preparing for our interview. We have lots of stuff on our website about like the sample questions and things you can think about. It's a 3-person panel interview where there are 3 interviewers and 1 applicant. It has been virtual the last few years. I suspect it will continue to be virtual for the next few years, but watch our website because we always announce it. It takes 30 minutes and only 1 person on the committee knows your MCAT and GPA. So the rest of the folks everyone's read your entire application, but only 1 person knows your MCAT and GPA. And then after the interview, there are executive committee meetings. and they make decisions. Those decisions go out again between October and March. And then yay, then you get into medical school and it's great. So we're going to open it up to questions here in a minute, but I just want to make sure y'all know about this. This website, we work really hard to put a lot of information on there. We try to be as transparent as possible about our process. We want to give everyone a fair shot. So I especially recommend the resources page where we have videos of presentations we've done. We've started doing the last couple of years something called Essentials, which is like if you're applying for that year, watch the recording of our Essentials video, because it sort of says like these are the specific requirements. But we also have like advice sessions while you're preparing. I also want to call out that you can ask us questions. I ask you some. We have, while we're not interviewing, so in spring and summer, you can also sign up for drop-in appointments. If you have a question for someone on our staff and you don't want to just call, you can set, if you want to have like a 10-minute, I want to ask you a couple questions. You can also sign up for those on the resources page of our website. And then we have been for the last year or so, on our Instagram page, we have students do takeovers, which has been really great because they will not only show you like a day in the life of what it is to be a med student at UW, they'll often do like an AMA and give advice. And the previous takeovers are all posted. They're pinned at the top of our page. So it can be a nice way to learn a little bit more about what it's like to be a student here. So why don't I just leave this up and let me start to answer some questions. How can I help? What are you thinking?
If people did running start for 2 years, does the college credit still look differently like when you're applying to med school?
That's a great question. So we go by what your college transcript says. So if your university, whatever your college counted from running start, whatever's on your transcript is what we go by there. So same with like AP and IB, if it's on your college transcript, we count it. So like, that's a good example for like the, humanities competency. Let's say you took like AP US history and got credit for college credit for that, that would count for us, for example. So as long as it's on your application. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great.
For people who write your letter back, how much does it matter about their title, or does it matter more that they just
Yeah, so who wants to anybody tell her? I think she was outside when I said that.
Oh,
No, I was just trying to get audience involvement. I'm not trying to shame you. No, so but I'll repeat it because it's important. It does not matter what their title is. It's more important that they write a good letter. So like the example would be like a famous professor who's like, you're in a class of 300 and there's a famous professor, but they don't know you that well, but you have a TA whom you've worked with and they've really seen who you are as a person. The TA is probably going to write you a richer letter. And that's what matters more. So yeah, get the person that is going to know you well and really speak, and who you can take time and say, here's some resources on like the types of things that they're looking for in a letter. They want to know more about like these things, and say, oh yeah, I can probably do that, right? Because I'll tell you, when a professor doesn't know you, the letter is always the same. The first paragraph is all about them and like what they do, their research, what the class was like. And then it's a paragraph that says, so-and-so was in the X% of students in this class, and then some other like they sort of fill it in. And that's, like they're busy, they have 300 students. So a lot of people are probably asking them, but those letters aren't super valuable for us. We're like, okay, well, nothing bad to say. So it doesn't really help us, right? It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt you to have a letter like that. It just doesn't particularly help us understand who you are as a person. That's a good question. So I'll repeat it in case folks didn't hear it. Do letters of recommendation have an expiration date? So let's say you are planning to graduate and take a few years before you apply to medical school or something like that, and you want to get a letter for the person you're working with now, what I would say is, or let's say you have to reapply, like, can you just resubmit the same letters? If you are still in contact with the letter writer, it can be helpful. You like have them write it when it's fresh and then ask them for a refresh of the letter. Like, you wrote me a letter a few years ago and I'm about to apply to medical school. Would you mind reviewing this letter? And if you still feel comfortable standing by it, could you put a new date on it and re-sign it? So that's like one way it's called refreshing a letter. They don't have to rewrite the letter, but they can just say, yeah, you can put a new date on that and submit it, right? If that makes sense. So, but our committee is pretty open-minded. If you graduated several years ago and your letters from a professor from several years ago, they're not gonna be like, why isn't this a fresh letter, right? Like that makes sense. I would just say, make sure not all of your letters are several years old, right? Because like you've grown and changed a lot in the several years. So we want to see who you are now.
Does it hurt your application if you have more recent experience than hands-on clinical?
And I'll repeat that. Does it hurt your application if you have more research experience than hands-on clinical? Not at all. If you're interested in research, you should absolutely do research and get that experience. But for our school, at least, we don't require research, so it's not going to hurt you if you haven't pursued that. What I'll say though is make sure that you still know what you're getting into as a physician and have a clear handle on that. And that actually, like if I could more easily get to my computer, I would pull up that clinical experiences page on our website, because it really gives you I think a full sense of the kinds of things we're looking for when we say, show us how you understand being a physician. I think I had anything I wanted to add about that. Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say about the motivation piece, about like, do you understand what it means to be a physician and motivation, is, can I read your application and think this person, is there anything else I can read that application and think this would work just as well for nursing school or to get a master's of public health, right? Like, what is it about being a physician specifically that's important to you? And that shows us and why is this the best thing for you, right? And so the old example is always like the sort of baseline motivation is, well, I like science and I like helping people, right? But there are so many things you could do if you like science and you like helping people. And medicine is certainly a great one. But why medicine specifically? What is it? What does the physician do? And how does that line up with who you are and what you've learned about yourself? So someone with solid motivation is really reflected in their application really openly. And I can tell you, having all that knowledge in your head doesn't help you if it's not on the page of your application, right? So you're like, but I know I want to be a doctor. I really understand it. But if you can't convey that to us, then it's not going to help you. And that's sort of the trick. And I think, and I can tell you, I worked for several years as a writing tutor. And I like to think, and so this is sort of one of the ways I frame the application that might be helpful for you all. So do you remember, I mean, for me, it was in middle school. People have different educational experiences, but I know I was taught, and I know my 12-year-old has also been taught, the famous 5-paragraph essay, right? Good, I'm seeing some nods, so some people have experienced this. So the idea behind this is that you've got your thesis paragraph where you say, I plan to prove this thesis in this essay using the following evidence. And you got like a little structured opening. And then each paragraph has your evidence to support your thesis. You state the evidence and then you explain how that supports your thesis. And then the end is a conclusion and how it all ties together, right? That's the 5-paragraph essay structure. I like to tell people to think of their medical school application as sort of like that. So your thesis statement might be something like, I would be a good physician, or something like, I want to be a doctor, or something like that, right? And then everything in your application is evidence to support that claim. But How many times has a professor or a teacher written in the margins of one of your essays, expand, tell me more, right? Like, I experienced that a lot. And then when I was a teacher, I remember like, oh my gosh, I have to write expand. I get it. So, and that's true on your application too. Because what I've seen it over and over again. People will write, because I would do feedback for people on their applications. And I would see that people would write things like, during this was a meaningful experience because I learned so much about what it means to be a doctor. And it really helped solidify this goal for me. And that's the reflection, right? And I see that and I'm like, but you didn't tell me what you learned. You tell me that you learned. I learned so much. Tell me what you learned. Expand, right? So everything that you put in your application is evidence that you should be a physician, but you also sometimes have to explain it. You have to connect it back to your thesis, right? So when you include your experience as a barista, connect that back. This is what I learned from that experience. This is what I learned about myself. I learned that I can handle, that I can maintain grace under pressure, that I can handle people who are upset. I can handle that with great, right? Like think about those kinds of things and how that ties together. So that's, sorry, nobody asked that question, but I think that can be for some people a helpful framing device, because you are putting together your application over months, years, and it can be hard sometimes to think of it as one thing. But by the time it gets to the committee, it is one thing. It's got your biographical information, it's got your personal statement, your experiences, your secondary essay answers, and your letters all in one thing. And we're reading that whole one thing, and we're trying to say, like, and I say